घंटे का बुक किया, सॉफ्टवेयर में इसमें बुक करना पड़ता है ना, 5 सवा 5 तक खत्म होना चाहिए, लेकिन मैं सेफर साइड की कुछ क्वेश्चन आए, कुछ ये आए तो
चलो मैं काम करता हूँ, आपको लीस्ट डिस्टर्बेंस हो, मैं अभी इधर बैठता हूँ until I am disturbed by somebody else.
लोग बाहर ही रहेगी, कहाँ पे बाहर है इसीलिए ना। लास्ट में देगा
वीडियो का पॉज हो गया।
कौन में सर मुझे इसमें बस हम शो होंगे, इसमें हम कुछ बहुत सारे लोग हैं, पता नहीं चल।
Yes sir. I've already logged in sir, so I think it should start now. Fine. Okay, fine sir. It's all right. Okay, thank you.
पास में तो फिर आपको फेस बहुत बड़ा दिखेगा।
ठीक है, अभी मैं ये देख रहा हूँ कितने कौन आया है।
ये देखने यहाँ पे 73 74 लोग लिस्ट में आ गए थे।
जूम में वो नाम आ जाता है।
नाम तो इसमें भी आ रहा है, इन लोगों ये तो लोगों की पर्सनैलिटी है ना।
हाँ, नहीं उसमें एक साथ सिर्फ नाम आ जाता है।
वो इसमें आता है। ज्वाइन करते जा रहे हैं। लोगों ने ज्वाइन कर रहे हैं।
ये नीचे कैसे जाएगा?
तो ये रहा बगल वाला सबसे लास्ट में।
कौन सा?
डिग्री लोग हैं।
कितने लोग हैं?
यहाँ पे दिख रहा है 82 होती थी।
वही 82 लोग हैं।
हाँ 83 हो गए, 84 हो गए, 85 86।
50 रुपए
तो बस अपनी स्क्रीन बड़ी करके छोड़ दिए तो ऐसे ही करना है। आपकी स्क्रीन बड़ी करके छोड़ दो बस आप दिखोगे।
मेरी स्क्रीन बड़ी क्यों?
हाँ, इतने लोग हैं, हम किस किस को देखते रहेंगे। ये सबको देखना, नहीं देखना, इतने लोगों में तो कैसे करेंगे। और हटाना ना इसे, ये रख लिए, ये रही, ये ऊपर कर्सर यहाँ पे नहीं, वहाँ पे ऊपर देखिए, यहाँ पे ये रही, इस पे बस क्लिक कर दिया तो सबके साथ आ गया। फिर हम यहाँ पे कोने में चले गए, इसी पे जाके क्लिक करिए, ठीक है। कोई भी इशू तो बोल देना।
और वीडियो और कैमरा ऑन कर दिया
सब
है?
ऑन है, ऑन है।
ठीक है फिर।
ये हमारा ऑडियो रेड नहीं है, अगर ऑफ हो ना तो ये रेड हो जाएगा।
ठीक है।
ऑडियो ऑन है।
जब चाय के लिए बोल दीजिएगा।
ಅದು ನೀವು ಮೊದಲೇ ಹೇಳ್ತೀರಾ ಆಮೇಲೆ ಎಷ್ಟು ವೆರಿಫೈ ಅಂತ ಒಂದು ಯಾಕಂದ್ರೆ
माहित आहे माहिती. Total first time was first slide. First. Good afternoon, all. Sorry for the inconvenience. So, PG Department of Commerce, Karnataka University of Harvard, organizing a day's webinar on Indian banking at Crossroads Schools. Resource persons are Dr. Manoranjan Sharma. Chief guest of today's function is H. Shivappa. So I'll give brief introduction about Karnataka University at Harvard, PG Department of Commerce, and Canara Bank Chair, and about chief guest of today's webinar. Karnataka University at Harvard is the second oldest university in the state of Karnataka in India, established in the year 1949. The university is spread over 888 acres of land, and the campus is known as Pavte Nagar, named after Wrangler Dr. D.C. Pavte, who was an educational administrator and former Vice Chancellor of Karnataka University. The university is re-accredited with A grade status by the NAC in 2014 and awarded University with Potential for Excellence by MHRD, Government of India. And PG Department of Commerce was established in 1958. During this period of more than 6 decades of its existence, the academic activities of the department have expanded. The department has well qualified and highly committed faculty. The department has completed 6 major research projects and many minor research projects. The department offers MCom, MPhil, PhD, MFM, MCom, CS degrees. Presently, active research is carried out in the areas of corporate governance, mergers, acquisition, microfinance, organizational behavior, marketing, banking, insurance, and capital markets, etc. And as far as Canara Bank chair is concerned, the chair was instituted in the year 2008 in PG Department of Commerce, Karnataka University, Harvard.
permission, can I begin? Okay, sir. Thank you very much, sir. Professor R.L. Hyderabad, Professor, former Dean, Finance Officer, Distinguished Professor of Commerce at the University of University Dharwad, Professor A.L. Shilashetty, my friend and colleague from my former institution, Canara Bank, Mr. Shirappa, distinguished family members, teachers, students, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, I am grateful to Professor R.L. Hyderabad, who has been a long-standing friend, as he said, for last maybe 10, 15 years. And then Professor Shiraz Shetty, the coordinator of this program, Canara Bank Chair, who deemed it fit to invite me to deliver this lecture. You have a beautiful campus, you have wonderful faculties, very hard-working, sincere students, and it is always good and encouraging to interact with students and teachers of your university. Now, coming to this topic of Indian banking at crossroads, let me try to place this issue in a wider perspective, because these are difficult times. These are challenging times, times of great turbulence, a time perhaps like no other in this century. COVID-19 has sometimes been compared to the Great Depression of 1929 and even the global financial meltdown of October 2008. But it is widely acknowledged by all multilateral institutions, other informed persons and individuals like the International Monetary Fund, IMF, World Bank, International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, ADB, Asian Development Bank, even our own Niti Aayog, Reserve Bank of India, Government of India, that this is perhaps a crisis like no other in this century. I do not wish to do any data crunching, but let me place before you two findings of two important studies which were placed in public domain recently. The World Bank forecast on June 8, 2020, that the global economy could shrink something by 5.2% this year. Similarly, the IMF forecast, which came recently, also forecast a contraction of 4.4%. Now, to place matters in perspective, it is important to recognize that this would be the deepest recession in the global economy since World War II. That means well over 70, 75 years. So this is the magnitude of the crisis that we are looking at here in the global economy today. As you know, India started on the process of lockdown sometime in March, followed by other lockdowns. Now we are in a process of gradual unlocking of the economy and the nation in almost all states. But despite this process of unlocking, India's animal spirits remain fragile. I am reminded of the well-known maxim of res ipsa loquitur. This is a Latin phrase which means in simple terms that facts speak for themselves. Let me briefly highlight some important features of the Indian economy today. As all of us are aware that the first quarter number, GDP numbers which are out recently, they showed a contraction of almost 24%, 23.9% to be exact. There are several projections of the GDP growth we may have this year. While assessments vary, it would perhaps be fair to say that there seems to be some kind of a consensus that this year we may end with a GDP of 8 to 10%. There continues to be a spike in COVID-19 cases at the national level. I think the figure has crossed 8 million, 80 lakh. Businesses continue to limp. Supply chains are disrupted. There is demand destruction on a large level, free fall in investment, weak consumption demand, low corporate credit appetite, and job losses and salary cuts. Now, if we look at the Indian position of the Indian economy today, what we find is that there are some positive features, some negative features. I'm reminded of a common analogy. If you have a glass with some water in it, perhaps I could be justified in saying that the glass is half full. But maybe looking at it from a different point of view, you may also be equally justified in saying that the glass is half empty. So if you look at the positive features of the Indian economy today, we have negative interest rates in major markets, huge forex reserves in India, which seem to surge from one peak to another, ample liquidity in the banking and financial sector. We will come to this issue of ample liquidity a few minutes later also, surging foreign direct investment. These are some important features of the Indian economy which place India in a good light. But I'm reminded of a famous dialogue of a Hindi film, I think Shah Rukh Khan, which says, "Picture abhi baki hai mere dost." For those of you who may not be familiar with Hindi, it simply means that there is other side of this picture also. So if you look at the flip side, there are issues of high unemployment rate, stress debt seems to be rising, there is no investment cycle in corporate credit, weak consumption engine, and weak balance sheets of banks. There have been several studies at the level of important institutions, and one important finding, which is of concern to us in India here, is that the banking systems of India, Mexico, and South Africa, it is expected that they will be slower to recover to 2019 levels. That means pre-COVID levels, and they may reach this 2019 levels sometimes by 2023 or even beyond 2023. There is also an important issue of moral hazards, payment culture. In terms of absolute value, willful defaults at the global level have increased more than 16 times from around rupees 6,175 crores US $12 in FY 2002 to rupees 99,954 crores US dollars $14,902 in FY 2017. Now, when we look at the banking sector, we have to recognize that the banking is a microcosm, is a miniature model of the larger national economy. Hence, the case for repositioning the banking sector has to be placed in a proper historical and comparative perspective. Sorry. Now, let me here refer to the issue of twin balance sheet problem, four balance sheet problem. Some of you may recall that Professor Arvind Subramaniam, till about, I think, 4 years back, he was the chief economic advisor of the government of India in the Ministry of Finance. Now, of course, he has gone to the US. So about 8 years back, he wrote an important paper for the economic survey. Most of you will be aware that economic survey of the Ministry of Finance, Government of India, is one of the most important authoritative document of the Ministry of Finance, and this has been so for the last 60, 70 years. The economic survey of the Government of India is placed on the floor of Parliament by the Honorable Finance Minister on the day preceding the presentation of the Union Budget. So the economic survey of the Government of India has a kind of sanctity which few other economic documents have. So when Professor Subramaniam wrote this one chapter for the economic survey about 8-9 years back, he brought this concept of what he called twin balance sheet problem. By twin balance sheet problem, he meant that the balance sheets of bigger companies were highly leveraged. Apart from this highly leveraged position of the bigger companies, the balance sheets of banks were also quite weak and debilitated. Now, last year, Professor Subramaniam presented an important paper at the University of Harvard in the US. Most of you realize that in terms of common perception, the University of Harvard in the US is generally considered to be the Mecca and the Medina of higher education, one of the most important educational centers globally. Now, in his paper at the University of Harvard, Professor Subramaniam expanded his concept of twin balance sheet to a four balance sheet problem. And apart from the original two sectors, highly leveraged position of companies, weak balance sheet of banks, he added the disarray in the NBFC sector, non-banking financial companies, and the mess in the real estate sector. Most of you would be aware that post the collapse of ILNFS about 4 years back, the NBFC sector in India has not been doing that well. Now, if you look at the position of public sector banks, the public sector banks here face majorly the problems of modest capital buffers, high and mounting levels of non-performing assets, bad loans, higher credit costs, weaker earnings because of interest reversals, and lower fee income. Plus, banks in general and public sector banks in particular also face this issue of subdued growth prospects. Now, let me try to set the record straight. Sometimes we in India, almost globally also, have a tendency to simplify things, which is not always correct. SCBs, scheduled commercial banks, that means banks which are listed in the second schedule of the RBI Act 1934, commonly referred to also as the banking industry, is not a monolithic category. There are significant differences across public sector banks and private banks and within these two groups. So we have to remember this important qualification, this important caveat before we go ahead. But on the whole, perhaps it may be fair to say that private banks are generally better placed to withstand post-pandemic challenges. An important change which relates to the banking sector at the present juncture is the fact that post-March, the Reserve Bank of India, which is the central monetary and banking authority of the country, has reduced the repo rate by 115 basis points since March 2020 and the reverse repo by 155 basis points. Despite this steep reduction, the liquidity in the banking system continues to be in a surplus mode. And one of the benchmarks, one of the measures of looking at the surplus in the banking sector is by the kind of money which is parked with the Reserve Bank of India in the reverse repo window. Now, obviously, the extent of money which is parked with the Reserve Bank of India in the reverse repo window differs from day to day. But on the whole, from the last if you take the position, last 4 or 5 months, it varies from something like 5 lakh crore to 7 lakh crore. So there is no dispute about the fact that the Indian banking system continues to exhibit surplus liquidity. This also reminds me of a very famous phrase used by Dr. Rakesh Mohan about possibly 8-10 years ago when he was the Deputy Governor of the Reserve Bank of India. Subsequently, he was Secretary in the Ministry of Finance also. He used a colorful phrase called lazy banking. When banks mobilize deposits and park it with GSEC, it amounts to what is called by Rakesh Mohan, Dr. Rakesh Mohan, as lazy banking. At the present juncture, we find that there is negative bank credit growth across sectors. There have been decline in major industries and also a significant downturn in retail and microcredit, which in India have been the major drivers of income, output, and employment. Now, the disruptions on the Indian banking sector can be looked at in two ways. What I propose to do here is to look from 2 points of reference. One is a short-term point of view, the other is slightly long. We take a longer view, medium to a relatively longer frame of reference. So because of this medical economic emergency, the disruptive changes brought about by COVID-19 can be seen in the difficulty in accessing branches for routine operations, default in loan payments by individual retail customers, scaling down of non-essential banking operations. There has been a significant reduction in domestic and cross-border trade, reducing forex transactions and inability to access data or infrastructure, leading to reduced serviceability. Now let me try to step back a little and try to place things in a medium to long-term perspective. I do not say long-term because I am reminded of Lord James King's famous comment which he made sometime in 1930s, almost 100 years ago, when he said that in the long term we are all dead. But sometimes in an issue of great criticality, like the banking sector, it is useful and advisable to step back a little and to see things in a relatively longer frame of reference. So from this medium-term point of view, there has been a rising need and preference for digital transactions, increased loan defaults, mostly by MSMEs and corporate customers due to reduced revenue and margins, resulting in high level of NPAs. Sorry. There's also been some kind of a flight to safety with preference for big banks and asset-backed instruments. For example, gold. There has been rampant layoffs in the private sector banks due to decreased margin. Now let me come to the issue of credit management in the banking system today. Despite the government's stimulus packages, the government has rolled out a series of stimulus packages. Most of us would recall that the Honorable Finance Minister, Madam, she made, I think, 4 or 5 stimulus announcements sometime in May, second week, third week of May. These have been followed from time to time by other stimulus packages. RBI has been proactive in infusing liquidity into the system to reduce the counterparty risk or credit risk of loan transactions and thereby minimize the potential systemic risk of a banking crisis. But despite all this, we find that there are increased loan defaults and delinquencies in the banking system. Another aspect which I would like to highlight is that besides the RBI's moratorium facility for all term loans, lenders have on their own proactively restructured loans to reduce the cash flow burden in the near term. But given the scale of the problem, given the magnitude of this COVID-19 devastation, more efforts are required because of widespread pain. In this kind of evolving scenario, banks should prepare for losses and build capacity to deal with an increase in delinquent loans. During this process of unlocking, which is currently on, banks need to repurpose, banks need to refashion their go-to-market and customer acquisition model, keeping in mind changing consumer behavior. Revenue from retail and commercial banking is falling sharply as underlying consumption and transactions have seen a sharp dip. Central banks around the world have slashed interest rates. Banks are reducing yields to generate businesses. But one impact of all such measures is the bank's net interest margins, popularly called NIMS in the banking sector, which is a basic measure of the kind of solvency, the kind of financial position the bank is in, which reflects these NIMS have steadily fallen. Income from payments and other fee-based incomes has also been hit by clear macroeconomic slowdown. I am aware of the fact that even prior to COVID-19, which began, some people maintain, in January, for us in India, we started taking serious measures sometime in March 2020. But this year, by all the projections, we may end up with a GDP contraction of 8 to 10%. And to place matters in perspective, this should be the most severe GDP contraction in the last 41 years or so. So if this is the magnitude of the gross domestic product, of the national income, of the national economy that we see today, the banking sector, being an important and integral part of the national economy, cannot be left untouched. There have also been measures like moratorium on loans, which have reduced banks' cash flow. There is some anecdotal evidence to suggest that there could be a drop of up to 10% in banks' payment revenues. Now, what can the banks do in this kind of circumstances? Banks cannot possibly stem the overall drop in revenue, but in this kind of a new normal, they need to focus on making payments safer by increasing limits on contactless payment channels and educating customers on digital products. Banks also need to engage with the Reserve Bank of India to contribute towards required policy changes, optimize their network by optimizing the number of branches, ATMs in operation, redeploy staff based on the government's mandate and footfall. It is necessary for banks to maintain adequate level of liquidity, ensure optimum liquidity and trade deployment given changing rates and bond yields. It is important for all constituents, all banks and the banking sector as a whole also, to assess vulnerabilities, identify strategic risks based on exposure to each sector and geography before providing loans. If the banks are able to extend loans on the basis of a proper assessment of the risk factors, of the kind of vulnerabilities inherent, maybe they will come to a better credit decisions. Now let me come to the issue of non-performing assets, popularly known as bad loans. Now most of us should be aware that of late the banking sector has been in the news for all the wrong reasons. There have been cases of high-profile cases. You are in Karnataka, so all of us should have heard the cases of Vijay Mallya, Mehul Choksey, Nirav Modi, with some diamonds, Deccan Chronicle. They are far too numerous to name here. But my submission here is that NPAs are not uniform across banks or across sectors. They reveal significant differences. While NPA is a common problem across banks, but there are significant differences across banks and even across different sectors. Now, in this connection, let me refer to the Reserve Bank of India's important publication called FSR. Some of you may be aware that for the last 8 to 10 years, the Reserve Bank of India has been bringing out an important publication called the Financial Stability Report. This is an important and a comprehensive publication of the Reserve Bank of India, which is brought out biannually in January and June. This year's second edition, which was to come out in June, was placed in the public domain by the Reserve Bank of India on July 20, 2020. Now, what this latest FSR, Financial Stability Report of the RBI, does is that It gives the findings of its stress testing for 53 scheduled commercial banks. And this FSR of the Reserve Bank of India has projected that the gross non-performing assets, sometimes in short also called GNPAs, of all scheduled commercial banks could rise from 8.5% in March 2020 to 14.7% under a very severely stressed scenario. Even in terms of a baseline scenario, the level of gross non-performing assets could rise to a level of 12.5% by March 2021. For those of you who may not have gone through the FSR, let me mention here that the Reserve Bank of India has projected three scenarios: baseline scenario, moderate scenario, and severely stressed scenario. In view of worsening macroeconomic scenario, the Reserve Bank of India has projected that private banks' bad loans, NPAs, could rise from 4.2% as at March 2020 to a band of 5.7 to 6.4% by March 21. NNPAs, which is a very important measure, even more than GNPAs, net non-performing assets, could rise from a level of 3.3% for public sector banks as a whole as at March 20 to a level of 4.2 to 4.3%. In case of private banks, the level of NNPAs could rise from 1.2% as at March 2020 to a level of 1.4 to 1.7% by March 21. Apart from this, we also gather that about 5 to 8% of the outstanding loan book could be restructured. Now, I am reminded of some famous lines of a Hindi poet, Dushyant. I am aware that being in Karnataka, all of you, so I'll give it in English, but these are powerful lines. And I quote Dushyant when he said, मेरा मकसद नहीं है हंगामा खड़ा करना, मेरी कोशिश है ये तस्वीर बदलनी चाहिए. So for those of you who may not be familiar with the Hindi language, let me attempt to give some kind of an English translation, which could go something like this. It is not my purpose here to create a scare, but it is my firm resolve that things should change and change for the better. On the whole, perhaps it could reasonably be maintained that most NPAs are now recognized, but there could be some more slippages down the road. Things could get worse before they get any better. Banks expect some kind of a likely surge in retail and MSME. Several infrastructure projects are also not doing well. So when the infrastructure projects do not do all that well, their cash flow will be squeezed, their repayment capacity would be affected, and obviously this could result in a higher level of defaults and delinquencies. Now, the issue of surge in NPAs has evoked considerable debates and discussion across the development spectrum. So this is a separate topic in itself, but on the basis of my experience for last 30 years, I had an occasion of working in leading banks, development financial institutions for last close to 40 years. And plus I also had a occasion to discuss with bankers, borrowers, people at the helm of affairs in the Ministry of Finance, also some central bankers and other people at the top level. And on this kind of a detailed discussion, debate, some kind of my own analysis of the kind of secondary data which is available in public domain, let me try to isolate and identify some important causes of the surge in NPAs that we see today. First, as I said earlier, India is now in a phase of contraction. and it will be the first such contraction in 41 years. So obviously, this has certainly a reflection in the banking system and the level of NPAs that we see today. There has also been high trade growth in some sectors, which led to decline in trade quality subsequently. High level of leverage of corporate borrowers, trade growth, diversion of funds, substandard assets, and frauds. All these aspects are strongly correlated. They are the first order derivative of improper credit and recovery management. Unfortunately for the banking system, there have been a high incidence of advances frauds, partly because of faulty credit appraisals, but there have also been macroeconomic, global factors, some factors at the level of bankers, borrowers, collusion between bankers and borrowers, a variety of factors. Possibly we could go into that at a later stage. There is also an important issue of moral hazard of identifying business failures as frauds. In some cases, what we find is that deficiencies in credit appraisal are not adequately highlighted. There are issues of due diligence, fixing of responsibility, staff accountability. All these also need to be looked at in greater detail. Now let me come to an important development which is sometimes considered to be a momentous development in the Indian banking space in general and the recovery landscape in particular. I refer here to the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, which has completely transformed the repayment scenario in India. This is Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code of 2016 is an act to consolidate and amend laws relating to reorganization and insolvency resolution of corporate persons, partnership firms, and individuals in a time-bound manner for maximization of value of assets of such persons, to promote entrepreneurship, availability of credit, and balance the interest of all stakeholders. Now, let me highlight some important features. It is generally maintained that IBC, Insolvency and Bank, has brought about some kind of a silent revolution, some kind of a paradigm shift. So let me highlight some important changes which have occurred because of the IBC. Now, if we look at the pre-IBC scenario, in case of recovery, we have now moved to resolution and liquidation. Earlier, there were multiple laws. Now we have a comprehensive code. Earlier, the system used to be reactive. Now we are proactive. Earlier, debtor was in control. Now the creditor is in control of the overall situation. In the pre-COVID IBC scenario, there were no strict timelines. Now this is a time-bound manner, 180 days plus 90 days. And again, some extension have been given because of the special COVID situation. In the pre-IBC scenario, the individual interest was considered to be paramount. Now we have this concept of balancing the interest of all stakeholders. Another important aspect of this IBC, Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, is the fact that pre-IBC, the crown dues, sovereign dues got highest priority, but now in this post-IBC scenario, crown dues get the least priority. Now let us come to emerging contours. What are the contours of the banking development today? Risk management has to gain sharper focus in the sense that sometimes it is considered in the banking system that people who are working in the risk management departments, it is their function to manage risk. But it is our submission that it is not so, and all people, managing of risk containment of risk, mitigation of risk is the purpose of everyone working in the banking system today. And all of them have worked together in a coordinated and concerted manner to detect vulnerabilities and capture risks with changed external environment and best practices. Now, as I said earlier, also we have been seeing that despite the stimulus measures of the government of India and RBI's attempt to infuse liquidity in the banking system, there seems to be some kind of a risk aversion at various levels of the banking system. So, why do we see this increased risk aversion, heightened sense of risk aversion? Having worked in the banking system for about 35 years, on my understanding, also with detailed discussion with several other well-informed persons, let me refer to what is called commonly as the fear of 5 Cs. By 5 Cs, I mean CVC, Central Vigilance Commission, CBI, Central Bureau of Investigation, C&AG, Comptroller and Auditor General, CIC, Central Information Commission, and various courts. Now, let me here refer to the basic purpose of banking. So, the basic purpose of banking, if you look at Section 5B of the Banking Regulation Act 1949, you will see that it defines a banking system as accepting deposits for the purpose of lending. So, lending has to be the bread and butter of banking. So, but in this kind of because of the fear of fees, 5 Cs, banks have increasingly become risk averse. They mobilize deposits, park them in G-Secs. So, this is not proper banking. I refer to Rakesh Mohan's comments earlier that this amounts to what he called lazy banking. In this kind of a scenario, it is important to manage operational risk, more particularly controlling the incidence of frauds, both cyber-related and otherwise. Banks also need to institutionalize an effective early warning system and forward-looking stress testing framework. Now, appropriate compliance culture is necessary, and this, in the ultimate analysis, needs to go beyond a legally binding compliance with broader standards of integrity and ethical conduct. Now, let me here refer to these days, most of you would be aware, working in the Commerce Department, Commerce faculty, and economics, finance, that banks are exposed to a variety of risks. Risks such as credit risk, market risk, operation risk, interest rate risk, sovereign risk. But apart from these risks, banks are also greatly affected by what is known as reputation risk. If, God forbid today, what is known as a run on the bank, there have been very comprehensive studies done across countries which show that if there is a run on the bank, then no bank anywhere in the world can survive for more than 45 minutes to 60 minutes. Because given the kind of banking model that we have, no bank will be in a position to repay all its depositors. So about the significance of compliance arises from the fact that let me refer to one recent case. About 3-4 years back, Habib Bank, which is Pakistan's largest bank, was fined US dollars $225 million by the US Fed, which is the counterpart of our Reserve Bank of India, because of various deficiencies observed in its regulatory supervision. So when we have this kind of a fine imposed by the regulator, it works something like a double whammy. One, of course, when banks are not adequate in a position to generate adequate levels of profits and profitability, this causes a dent in the levels of their profits and profitability. But the other more damaging aspect is the fact that it causes a reputation risk to the banks in the sense that it has to be mentioned upfront in the director's report, annual report. It has to be given wide publicity. It has to feature on the homepage of the website of individual banks. So it causes a severe reputation risk. It is important to put in place a strong governance framework with effective risk and compliance culture and strong internal audits and inspections. Proactive buffers building and capital raising with credit flow, enhanced resilience in the financial system will help to make the system stronger. In this kind of a situation, banks and NBFCs need to assess the impact of COVID 19 on their balance sheets, asset quality, liquidity, profitability, and capital adequacy for risk mitigations measures relating to capital planning, capital raising, and contingency liquidity planning, among other aspects. Now, let me come to my concluding observations. COVID 19, as all of us are agreed, will have an enduring impact across industries all over the world and even in India also. Now, so what are the policy prescriptions which emerge? Uh, Some of you might be aware that IMF, International Monetary Fund, has done a lot of excellent work in this area, and they have highlighted three important measures to be undertaken by all countries. Since all of you may not have occasion to go through the IMF reports, let me highlight just three important finding of the IMF studies. One is that we have to work in a synchronized manner to end the health crisis by reaching everyone. And if we are successful in doing this at the global level, this could add almost US $9 trillion to the global economy, global income by 2020. The second point which the IMF brings out is the reinforcement of the economic bridge to recovery by sustained support to businesses and workers until we exit the health crisis. There should not be any premature withdrawal, in other words. The IMF also lays a great deal of stress on building the foundations of a better 21st century global economy by revitalizing the international trading system, foster an international system of taxation where everyone pays their fair share, and accelerate the transition to the new climate economy on which the health and prosperity of our children depends. So, in other words, a new global financial architecture is the need of the hour. Coming to the banking system in India, banks need to be adequately secured with their assets, qualitatively strong, and amply capitalized. Post crisis, digital maturity and COVID 19 resilience will determine the strategy of banking players. In this kind of a overarching setting, we visualize three distinct segments emerging. One, banks which are already future ready with truly digital banking capabilities and cost. Now, even if I refer to NPAs one more, even if I confine myself to the aspect of quality or NPA management, here digital being banking could help banks to effectively manage loan recovery processes with systematic workflow, early warning systems to flag non-performing assets, analysis of repayment capacity to offer flexible payment choices, root cause analysis for NPAs, implement required changes in trade policy, product promotions, etc. complete case management, legal notes. It could also help. Some cases, especially those fraud cases, are characterized by what is known in the banking system as quick mortality accounts. So a bank which is digitally well equipped, it would help to do a important analysis of the quick mortality so that such cases do not recur again. Automatic contact process for consistent follow-up. Banks could implement an analytical dashboard with complete customer 360-degree details. But one of the, again, unpleasant aspects of this greater tech savviness is the fact that customers, some fraudsters are one step ahead of the banks. So they use these technological systems to commit large scale frauds for the banks. So there has to be a greater use of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and predictive analysis, together with an accent on a renewed trust on fraud detection and risk management, know your customer, and anti money laundering mechanisms. The second set of banks, which are digital laggards, need to evolve and renew due to subpar COVID-19 resiliency. And banks which persist to be digital laggards will struggle to survive because of subpar financial and operational resilience. There has to be synchronized efforts to reduce the stock of outstanding NPAs, shore up capital adequacy of banks and credit premia, and also improve the overall accessibility of bank credit. Now, I am reminded of a few lines of a very famous, one of the most famous Hindi poets, Ramdhari Singh Dinkar, when he said that, "Ye nakat amake bushte hain, sara akash tumhara hai." Let me attempt to give some kind of an English translation, which could go something like, the stars of the sky are fading, the entire sky is yours. So the tunnel may be long, the tunnel may be difficult, but the Indian people and the Indian banking system has always displayed dynamism and immense resilience. I am confident that this time, despite the kind of humongous challenges that we face today, will not be any difficult. We shall overcome. All religions ultimately stress the same kind of thing. In the Christian philosophy, for example, there's a very important concept which stresses that this too shall pass. That means that present times are difficult, the present times are challenging, but this will not always remain like this. Better times will come. Hum honge kamyab. We shall be successful. Thank you all for giving me this opportunity. I'll be happy to take any questions, any queries which you may have on the subject. And once again, I am thankful to Professor Hyderabad, Professor Sheila Sethi, distinguished faculty members of the Department of Commerce, Karnataka University, Dharwad, and all of you here for giving me a patient hearing. Thank you all. It's been a pleasure and a privilege connecting with all of you once again. Thank you very much. Thank you. I'd be happy to take any questions. I've finished.
all the I request once again all the participants to interact with Dr. Manoranjan Sharma, who is eager to answer your queries. Hello. So one or two questions.
Hello, sir.
Please.
Hello, sir. Hello, sir.
Please. Hello.
Hello, good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Sir, I'm Dr. Indrayani Katti from Karnataka College, Dharwad.
Yes, ma'am.
Sir, one side, the banking scenario you have explained, the other side, the citizens, senior citizens are there. So what measures are taken by the RBI in protecting the senior citizens' savings rates and all? Because senior citizens lead their life based on the bank deposits, interest rate, whatever they draw. And they even provide the senior citizens, that is 15H form to the bankers. But they will not update this, and automatically there is a reduction in the savings interest. So what measures are there?
Okay, ma'am. To start with the second part of your question, this 15H form that you can take it up, you can send a mail to the banks and then claim it. So there is stiff penalties. If the banks have not updated their systems and software, the bankers are required to follow your instructions and pass on this benefit in 15H. So this is one part of the story, one part of your query. The second part is that in this kind of what banks are doing in this kind of evolving circumstances, senior citizens have been very hard hit, because as you are aware that in the last 4-5 years, especially post March, the interest rates have been in a free fall. So, but unfortunately, if I'm not working for any leading bank, so I can speak a little more frankly. What happens is, and you are a professor of commerce, you'll know that at the end of the day, the banks are a commercial entity, so they have to generate some level of profits. So what happens is the borrowers act as some kind of a lobby, some kind of a pressure group at various levels, at the level of Reserve Bank of India, at the level of Government of India. They have bodies like FICCI, Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry, SOCHM, PhD Chambers of Commerce, Karnataka Chamber. So they work as some kind of a pressure to bring down this interest. Now it has to be realized that this cannot be a one-way traffic. If the banker is reducing the rate of interest on loans and advances, there has to, especially I don't have to explain to you all these senior commerce professors, double entry bookkeeping kind of a thing, that this will also have an equal impact on the deposit side. So each bank, they have a highest policy making bodies called ALM, Asset Liability Management meetings, in which senior bankers at the level of DGM, GM are present. So they take a call. So, but this is some kind of a force which is unstoppable, because if you keep on reducing the rate of interest on loans and advances, this low interest on deposits also goes down very steeply. So this has hurt the senior citizen, for whom interest on deposits, interest on term deposits is a major source of income. Maybe they could look to other competing instruments, some debentures, some other deposits of private companies, depending on their risk appetite. They could also think of investing to a limited extent in capital market maybe you could also, if you get the right price, you can look at real estate. But my only suggestion that is that as you grow older, your risk appetite goes down. That means you are not in a position to take a major hit. So even if you don't get much return, at least your principal should be safe. So when you're looking at instruments such as capital market, real estate, my only suggestion to you is my submission will be that okay, maybe you could get a higher return, but never put all your eggs in one basket.
Yeah.
Please, for heaven's sake, always diversify your funds. Never put all your eggs in one basket, diversify, do some kind of a SWOT analysis of your balance sheet. What is the kind of risk appetite? What is the kind of hit to your balance sheet you can take? And accordingly, to a limited extent, you can take some bit of risk, maybe. But in economics, finance, and commerce, there is always a very important concept, what we call a risk reward matrix. So if you are keen to get higher returns, you will have to take a higher risk also.
Risk. Yeah.
So that would be my submission. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. So,
Sir, nowadays, sir, banking loans are bad loans are day by day, sir. What is remedy how to work on this, sir?
Well, again, this will be a full session, but in short, let me attempt to answer. Remedies are well known. By and large, at several
Banking loans day by day, bad loans are increasing like many fold.
Okay. So, in case of NPAs, this has to be right from the time of sanction. These have to be loans have to be very carefully monitored, especially the high value, high ticket accounts. There are also issues of pre-sanction, pre-disbursement, pre-sanction appraisal. Appraisal has to be proper. Post-disbursement supervision has to be adequate. Then monitoring of the accounts. Then in case of NPAs, we lay a great deal of, basically attempts have to made to contain NPA at two levels. One we call the legal measures like serving notice, SARFAESI Act, now IBC and other things. The other is what we call non-legal recourse. Non-legal recourse is contacting the borrowers. Maybe you could appoint recovery agents. Banks could appoint recovery agents in all branches, frequently contacting the borrowers, publishing the name of the defaulters in local newspapers, sending reminders through SMS, emails, also contact social sites. For example, banks, some banks came across some cases where the borrowers vanished and they did not leave any. So in that cases, the bankers, especially in case of education loans. So what they did is they went to social sites, they went to Facebook sites, WhatsApp sites, and found out the name of the institution where those people were working. And they threatened, like for example, they may be working in Europe or America. So the bankers threatened them that if you don't prepay our dues, we will write for your immigration visa to be cancelled, to be blacklisted from your institution. So all those also had a very strong, but bankers also have to go the extra mile, follow all these legal methods, non-legal methods, pre-sanction appraisal has to be proper, post-disbursement supervision, monitoring of the accounts. Then in some cases, unfortunately, we also find some limited element, very few cases, but some there could be an element of collusion also. So there are issues of due diligence, fixing of accountability, fixing of responsibility, staff accountability. All these also need to be sometimes adopted to send some kind of a strong and an effective deterrent message. So I think if we proceed on these lines, this problem of NPAs will never go away, but this could be contained within manageable proportions. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Okay, thank you, sir.
We allow one more question.
Any other questions? Okay.
Good afternoon, sir. Sir, how the merger of banks would help the revive of the economy and strengthen the banking systems?
Okay, thank you. This is a very topical and a relevant issue. Now, the merger of the banks, this has gained sharper focus 2 years back with the merger of the associates banks with the State Bank of India. Again, in South India, we had the merger of Canara Bank and Syndicate Bank, Bank of Baroda merger with Vijaya Bank and other banks. Now, if you look at the global experience of mergers, consolidation in the banking system, mergers and acquisitions, we find that the experience of mergers globally, sometimes also called consolidation in the banking sector, is mixed. It becomes unless all the spade work is done, it is carefully monitored, at least for a period of 5 to 7 years, mergers may not be fully successful. Some important aspects to be seen in merger is, I think, it was kept in mind by the government of India in the recent round of mergers, that banks need to be on the same technology platform. There are several platforms, FlexCube, iFlex, and other things. So 3 or 4 softwares mainly. So if banks are on the same technology platform, then it is relatively simpler, because these days all banking operations are technology driven. Then the HR practices, the organizational ethos and culture, if also they are similar, if they are completely dissimilar, then again it will cause. So a lot of work has to be done prior to merger, even post merger. I am reminded of a very 1,000-year-old English phrase. This is commonly used in England, but I think it has applicability in case of mergers. I think I've used it in some of my writings for Economic Times, Business Line, etc. That we should always avoid marrying in haste, because if you marry in haste, you will repent at leisure. So before marriage, you have to do all the spade work. You have to find out about the boy and the girl, so that you do not come to grief after marriage. So similarly, in case of mergers and acquisition, prior to merger, you must do due diligence, you must do this spade work, you must find out, and then once you have decided to merge, you must constantly monitor, do some kind of an course correction as and when needed. So if you do all those things, I am confident that the merger will proceed on sound lines and it will be successful. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Yes.
There's one more question.
Question.
Yeah, these are both the things I comment. Answer ಕೇಳಿಲ್ಲ.
Thank you for all the participants. The respected Dr. Vinod Sharma, Chief Economic Rating and former Economic New Delhi, Sri S. AGM, Regional Office, Dubai, our faculty department, Professor Arun Agrawal, Chairperson Department, Professor Ian Tambuki, Dr. Kiran Al, and other members of the department and all members and all participants of this webinar. It is my duty to express my deep sense of gratitude to Dr. Arun Sharma, who accepted our invitation to be the chairperson of this webinar. He has highlighted the entire scenario of banking sector and Indian economy and banking sector in today's economy, and he highlighted Indian banking system with a low cost rate today. So all of us are benefited from his speech, and we got what is the scenario of Indian banking system. Sir, on behalf of everyone and my own job and on behalf of my member and on behalf of Karnataka University Dharwad, I express my deep sense of gratitude for sparing your precious time and delivering speech on this theme, that is uh, Indian banking system in Indian banking system of the cosmos today. Sir, thank you once again. Another very important person from this is Sri Swapan, AGM Government Regional Head Hubli. In spite of it, he agreed to become the chief guest of this webinar and inaugurate this webinar. Sir, I behalf of everyone, on my own job and on behalf of my faculty and on behalf of Karnataka University, I would like to express my deep sense of gratitude to you also. So this webinar is materialized due to the support of our senior faculty member, Professor Arun Agrawal, who has guided us in conducting and organizing this function. He is the backbone of our department. Sir, I also express thanks to you all and our chairperson, Professor M. Tamravan, who is the main member of this webinar. So I thank you, Madam. I also thank all the participants and all of the participants of this webinar. I also thank our other faculty members, Professor Chandra, Kiran Makapur, and other faculty members of this department, and our faculty, Vijay Bhatla, and other all other participants. Thank you, one and all. Thank you.